Hi, everybody. Looks like I'm making my way through the entire Sportico cast. I got Jacob Feldman here with me today. Thanks for joining me, Jacob.
My pleasure. Good afternoon.
Yeah, awesome. I'm Josh Walker. I'm the co-founder of the Sports Innovation Lab. Today we have a very, very special guest. We have Hilary Knight, all-around badass on the ice. I can't read your entire bio. I honestly would be here all day. But Hilary is in the midst of really just an incredible career. She's been to several world championships, several Olympics, but probably most importantly, she's a very strong advocate for equality in sport. And we're going to touch on what she believes the fan experience should look like for young people, how she got started in her career, what she does with sponsors, and everything else that kind of rounds out this discussion. But Hilary, thanks for joining us. I want to start with where you started your career. I want to start in youth sports because a lot of what we're going to talk about when it comes to equality in sports and the way that the current professional sports industry works is really tied to the idea that, fandom starts when kids are younger. There's a lot of thesis around the idea that if you participate in youth sports, you may become a fan of that sport. And so I would love for you to sort of touch on how you got started. I know you talked a lot about playing on boys teams, getting cut from boys teams, driving a lot of energy from that. Angela tells similar stories about being cut on her brother's team and how she got fired up to continue to compete. Can you start there? And while you're doing that, I want to welcome anybody who's joining us to ask your questions. If you go over to the Q&A, the polls, the chat area on your screen, if you type in your questions, if you type in something in chat, Jacob and I will be keeping an eye on that as we go. And if we see your question, we're happy to ask Hilary as we go. But Hilary, with that in mind, can you take us back to the beginning? What got you fired up and what made you an Olympian?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, guys. To be honest, I got into hockey in a very non-traditional way because I'm from California. I'm from a huge ski family, and we moved to Chicago. And my mom was like, "What do I do with my children? How do they meet other kids?" So hockey, signing up for skating lessons became hockey quickly. But it was really just a way to meet other kids because we were new. But you're right. I mean, there's at the time, it's crazy to think that Ange and I overlapped for many years, but she's had a really well storied career before me, but we continue to encounter some of the same similarities, and being cut from a boys team, taking a position away from a boy. And to be honest, a lot of programs at that time prioritizing the boys over the girls because there was a pro league that the boys were eventually, inevitably in their minds going to just fall into. So it's a really interesting landscape, especially for my generation. Fortunately, there's more opportunities at the youth level for girls development, and we see more girls teams. But still, I think there is some commonality and similarities to what Angela and I and many others had experienced growing up. And I think that just instilled this drive to be like, no, I'm going to show up and I'm going to make sure that I'm better. I'm going to work harder to really capitalize off the opportunities when they do come.
So over the next 40 minutes, we'll get into sort of your perspective on how pro sports needs to change to really accommodate different types of forms of sport and different types of competitive formats and things like that. But if we focus on the youth level again, just for a little bit longer, what do you think needs to change at that level to really make it more equal when children are getting started? You mentioned the idea that there's an aspirational pro league. So there already is a mindset that like, hey, I can go do this if I'm a boy and I can make it to the men's league. You guys have now established a women's professional league. You guys have played with different formats for that league. What would happen at the youth level to make that more present in the mind of those young girls that are actually getting started? Different coaching, different sponsors down there, different format of the game itself, separating the boys and girls earlier. Yeah. What do you think needs to happen?
Isn't that the multi-million-dollar question here?
It is. That's why I got to ask.
You're here.
The person is still on the right.
Yeah. No. Well, so we technically don't have a sustainable pro league. And I think that's part of the missing puzzle piece for this entire grassroots development portion. But to be honest, it's advocate accessibility to ice time, to various resources. It's also coaching and coaching education. I know depending on where you are in the world, there's different certifications and things like that. But there aren't the same opportunities when you stack everything up that boys get, girls also get. And so I think it's continuing to push that. And part of that is, yes, visibility at the professional level definitely helps that, because, a young boy growing up can see, Sidney Crosby on TV and say, oh, I'm going to be the next Sidney Crosby. But a young girl right now can't necessarily see us. So what we're doing at the professional level is trying to combat that visibility and make it more common and consistent that people can see us. And even if it's a young boy seeing us saying, oh, I want to play professional hockey, doesn't matter, right? Because it's hockey. So that's one piece to it. But then the other piece is making sure that there's equal opportunity for girls to get involved in the sport, equal opportunity for fans to get involved. And a lot of that is just accessibility of the game.
I'm curious, you mentioned for you growing up, those boys that you played with, how they saw themselves and inevitably, like you said, making it to the NHL. What did you see for yourself at that time? I'm curious kind of what your vision of the future was, given the state of things when you were coming up.
Yeah. So I thought I was just going to go pro. I wasn't, dissuaded by gender, so to speak, just because that was the only option. Right. So I said, okay, well, if I'm good enough, then I can make it here. And somewhere along the way, I must have seen hockey on TV and said, oh, I'm going to go to the Olympics and do that. And at the time, there's no women's hockey. So I think it goes to show how powerful visibility can be at a young age, because that's we always say if she can see it, then she can be it. So if he or she or whomever is aspiring to do something and they see that on TV, it's just so powerful.
Well, I think that's really where we're heading with this entire conversation, because everybody has this chicken and egg, feeling about the pro league and the viewership and what needs to happen to kind of influence and change this cycle that's going on. What's really interesting, and you're very good at this, is that you as athletes are using your direct to consumer channels much more effectively. And we've done some research at the Sports Innovation Lab, largely to prove that male athletes, while they're generating spectacles like dunking the ball really hard or having a huge hit, the female athlete, not completely and always the case, tends to be more open and more rounded and some more conversational in their brand. You've built your brand. Yeah, you have to be, but it also feels like it also comes more from the authenticity of being like, we know what it's like to be coming up through this system. So talk a little bit about that. How do you give back through those direct channels? Bring your dog into the conversation, bring your, like a lot of the things that you've done on social media, make it very easy to get to know who you are.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's been so pivotal for women's sports and women in sport, is now we have another platform that, oh, by the way, it's free. And Angela Ruggiero encouraged me to sign up years ago. And I was like, what is this Twitter thing? And I'm so glad she did, because it just got me going about thinking how to brand yourself and how to communicate with people on different platforms. And I said, we have to do it because we have to provide these behind the scenes looks or the storylines. Maybe it starts out of just hey, I want to communicate with friends, or hey, this is what I want to share with fans. Doesn't matter how it starts for us, but I think we see the need to provide visibility to what we're doing, because specifically in ice hockey, until recently, you only really saw us every 4 years. And now we have other programming, and hopefully that's going to become more consistent. But then social media came along, and now it's another avenue to say, hey, now we can continue this conversation, maintain our relevancy, and oh, by the way, connect with people all over the world, which is just such a game changer for everyone.
Is there an athlete, men's or women's, who you look up to and kind of aspire to when it comes to that branding? Is there someone you feel like has really shown you how to use social media and how to take advantage of some of those platforms?
Yeah, I'd say Angela Ruggiero. I mentioned her quickly, but she was one of my mentors within the U.S. program, and someone who just was able to take things apart and explain them. And I just remember always being like a sponge when I was around her, right? Because I was like, she's super knowledgeable, very intelligent, well-spoken, and she knows how to do things, right? So it's like, okay, if I can just like grab an ounce of this knowledge, that's so important for me. But looking back and social media, it started out as a fun thing and just palling around with my teammates and being like, let's do fun things so other people can get introduced to the sport and share the same love and passion that we have for ice hockey. And, maybe they don't realize what we do away from the rink, which is a lot of the times people only see us on the Olympic stage, whether we're winning or losing medals, right? So it was just another way to provide insight into what we're doing. But I wouldn't have known that unless I had a mentor to say, hey, this Twitter thing, it's important. And then I'm like, okay, the Instagram thing and the TikTok. So
yeah, so I mean, Ange may have opened your eyes to it, but it's been over a decade since she retired, and I'm not trying to make her sound old, but you guys have different tools now. Like you mentioned TikTok and Instagram, and there's much more short form content. And I also have to note that, like, when I was researching you, a lot of it seemed to be produced by Red Bull and some of your sponsors. And I wonder just how much of like that conversation you have with your agent, with your sponsors about like, hey, let's do more branded content together. Is that part of your plan, or that just happens serendipitously as you sort of continue on with your career?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I'm thinking back, 6 or 7 years ago, you couldn't really get sponsorships in the sport, right? And so it became one of these things where it's like, okay, how do you differentiate yourself from 23 other amazing women? And, if you do have that opportunity, what does that look like to you? So for me, I said, okay, well, if I do have an opportunity to work with a brand or a sponsor or a partner, obviously our missions need to align, but what are they going to do to promote the sport, and how are we going to go into that storytelling, and can we do that creatively, and is it going to be well received by fans? And really, I just took a second to say, okay, like if I'm going to be seeking out sponsors and partnerships and stuff, they have to align, but we need to push the sport forward. And I've been extremely successful with my current partners in Red Bull and Bauer. Just part of it's the planets aligning, I guess, but a lot of it is just well thought out how you're going to tackle these obstacles.
Well, with your dog, you might want to do Chewy as well. I would start getting. Is it a him or a her?
Him.
Yeah, I think you should bring him into the mix here. Make him earn his meals. Sorry, Jacob. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you got to be careful. He's going to start stealing the sponsorship. So all of a sudden you're going to be his agent.
That's fine. I'll go behind the lens. It's fine. It's fine with me. But no, I think, and that's the thing though. Is it first? It starts out of sort of like a passion, fun thing, palling around, and that becomes more so a business and a tool. So that was a big tipping point, I guess, so to speak.
I was curious, as you're talking about, these social efforts, social media, the business efforts, and there's some hockey mixed in there too. I'm curious, like how you break down your day. Do you like carve out specific time for those kind of brand and business development, or do you just kind of try to shoehorn that in between practice? How do you manage to kind of make all that work?
A perfect world, I would sit down and say, okay, this is my calendar, but it doesn't always work out that way, especially with COVID, because there's all sorts of things popping up and changing. But, I don't sit down and do a massive content capture by any means, but I know, our milestones with the US team. And so those are sort of a lock. I don't really mess around with those, obviously. And then the PWHPA stuff is another thing. And then I have practices and training. And so those are all hard points in the schedule. And then things around that, I kind of just work them in when I can. But it's always fun when you get a call from a Red Bull to say, hey, we have this concept, and what do you think about this? And you're like, okay, like, let's go do that. And you're looking at the calendar, you're like, okay, I can fit it in here. So that's really how those conversations work.
We are working, as you know, at the Sports Innovation Lab on Angela's project, the fan project, which is trying to get data directly from fans of women's sports to prove that they behave differently than traditional sports fans, if you will. What do you think we're going to find? I mean, what do you think from your experience of like seeing how fans behave differently at men's sports than women's sports? Is there a noticeable difference, or it's just a different type of environment?
I think the engagement will be different, and I'm selfishly I'm hoping you find that, right? Because I think social media has just been a driving force for many female athletes, and the engagement is natural, and we've been able to develop a cult following with a limited platform already. So I think that's the exciting thing, is when you get into the data and you kind of mine through things, what you find is I'm hoping a different type of engagement, and potentially that could, display a more valuable picture towards women's sports.
Yeah, I think we struggle with the idea that the naysayers say that people don't watch women's sports because it's less exciting. There's not as much action, blah, blah, blah. But they're also produced very differently, right? There's not as many camera angles. They're not on TV as often. They're different time slots. Sometimes they're on tape delay. So there's a lot of things that run against that. And again, we continually struggle with this like chicken and egg thing. Well, if you do that, will that follow? And I'm just very interested from the athlete's perspective. Angela always talks about like traveling around and sometimes going to these arenas that are just packed and everybody's going berserk, and then going to and playing in literally an empty ice rink. What do you think you see in that fandom that would lead you to believe that they're more engaged, that they're more, even if it's a cult following, like what are they doing that you think is different than the traditional fan?
I think, and I'll just take hockey as an example. You have to sift through a ton of things to be able to find that doorbell.
Yeah, you got to work for it, right?
Right.
Yep.
And I think people are willing to go above and beyond to even just find that awful lens camera. And I think that's where the hope and it sort of sparks, right? Because if you're thinking, okay, they go out of their way to engage already. Imagine if it's more consistent and people know which network we're on, or they know when our schedule is. And that's where I think the floodgates are just going to open. But specifically for other sports, like we saw WNBA absolutely crush it. And obviously the social movements that they've been doing are unparalleled in any sport, right? And then recently for the tournaments, the NCAAs, right? So there's a lot of amazing things that are happening to women's sports right now, and maybe it's because of COVID, and it gave us an opportunity and a platform to show up, because we know our product's amazing. It's just getting the platform to perform on. NWSL too. There's another one.
And you hit on the pandemic there, and that's really, talking to a lot of athletes over the last year has changed the way they, a lot of them connected more with fans over the last year, because that was all you really could do was, message back and forth online. And a lot of them thought more about their business outside of the sport because they had time to think about their business outside the sport. I'm curious for you, what are your biggest takeaways from being forced to be off the ice and from spending so much time, I'm guessing, online over this last year? And how's that kind of change your mentality heading into next winter?
Well, first off, I was like, oh, this is the worst thing that can happen. And someone quickly was like, hey, there's less miles on the car. I was like, oh yeah, less mileage. So that's great. But oh man, I don't know. I think just the value of being able to be connected. I think I understood how important it was to be able to communicate on different channels, but now even more so. As athletes, I think it's changed me and how I approach things, because we are creatures of habit, and you really just have to be able to adjust and adapt, especially when we're on iteration, number 17 of whatever we originally thought of. So it's been interesting. You kind of have to go with the flow and be safe as you can, but really, you have to be ready for an opportunity when it presents itself, but also ready to adjust when it doesn't.
I'm gonna ask you a very specific athlete question, because it as somebody who's played as long as you have, and you're definitely got that long career now. That doesn't make you old either. It's like, you're putting the miles on, as you said. What you said in your video, that you still stay hungry. What keeps you hungry? Like are you going for your own personal records, or is there some sort of PR that you look for? Is it the team stats? What do you what motivates you when you have to get up in the morning and do it again? Like, where do you dig in?
Yeah, I think the scary thing is I've done everything, right? I think that's the scary thing. What keeps me hungry is winning. I love winning more than anything else. I love that, your blood's boiling moment, pucks on your stick, last seconds of the game. Maybe you make it, maybe you don't, but that sort of moment before is something I live for, and I absolutely love it. And the only other time I experienced that was right before heading out for SNL, right on the stage. But no, I like to win, and I hate losing. And I just think it's just that simple to me. Records are records, whatever, but people remember the teams.
Do you give yourself time to think about what that looks like when you take the skates off?
A little bit, yeah. Because and I was talking to one of my other teammates. I'm like, oh, we're the old ones now. I don't know when that happened. We're not even old, but it's like, what does the next chapter look like? Because differently than our male counterparts, when they retire, they can retire. We can't just retire. We go on to our next career. So really it's setting up those building blocks now to make sure that the transition will never be easy, but hopefully it's easier because we thought it through.
Well, I asked Angela how much I can press you on that. I'm like, is she at that point where she can answer that question and she's going to be able to, rattle off a bunch of ideas? And she goes, let me tell you about 2005. And so she took me back to when she first saw you. And I don't know if she's told you this story, but when you showed up at one of these like kids trials or something, you jumped to the front of the line and you like crushed it, like literally crushed it. And there's Angela, multi-time Olympian by that point. And she leans to one of her teammates and goes, who the hell is that kid? So she remembers you from like just showing up at some clinic that you showed up, completely dominate the drill. And now she's like, well, there's no question, Hilary's going to be in the Hall of Fame. So you got that directly from the GOAT herself. So you're already tapped. But two, she's like, Hilary loves hockey. Mm-hmm. Right. So now tell me, like, if you take the skates off, and some of these questions on the right-hand corner here are all about this. If the league, and I'm not telling you to lose, I'm not telling you to give up on the idea, but if the league doesn't happen at the level that you want it to, let's put that aside. What can you do besides the league to really change the narrative for women's hockey and build the vision for the future that you really want to see?
That's an interesting question. To be honest, I always see staying in sport. I don't necessarily think, hockey. I love hockey, and it's where my expertise is, right? And so it would be easy to stay in the sport and, maybe be an analyst or things like that, which I'm definitely interested in. But I think what Angela and you guys are doing is incredible. I think there's a intersection of sport and tech that is fascinating, and it's going to change the way that an average fan consumes sport, and potentially the way that we as athletes see traditional sports. And I think that's fascinating. So that's definitely something of interest to me personally, and I know through those channels it will affect hockey specifically, but other industries as well. So
let's nerd out a bit, because Jacob covers this stuff as well. Wearable technology, new cameras that collect how fast you're skating, all the sports betting that's going on. The NHL is now doing the player and puck tracking. Is there stuff on your body, on your uniform, that wasn't there before, that you're wearing in training or that you're wearing in competition?
Yeah. So what has changed? So I've always worn a heart rate monitor. So I am like wed to that thing at this point.
For load, or for what? For peak performance?
Just to figure out training loads. And now we're on a platform called MyZone, and I got introduced to it through Mike Boyle's gym, and he has all these screens, and it was more of like a way to see how you stack up against other people you're training with, and then also individually to track your rest and things like that. But now it's become more social. So my teammate in California or Alaska, or whomever is wearing the same device, we can communicate and kind of map out training that way as well. in addition to the heart rate monitor, I'm wearing a Whoop right now, right? So that's definitely different. And now we're seeing, okay, coaches aren't necessarily going to bag us and skate us into the ground like they used to, because rest is important now. And now we're valuing.
So does the coach get the Whoop data?
So they don't. But wouldn't it be interesting if, athletes could own pieces of their own data and bargain in different agreements? Because I think it would be an interesting behind the scenes look for a fan to say, oh, so-and-so got this much rest, or this is what their heart rate's at. Are they going to perform in the third period, the final shift, or however you want to slice it up? So the sky's kind of the limit. What you guys are doing is really interesting.
Well, I appreciate that, but that Whoop thing keeps track of how long you've been sleeping, what your recovery is like, and if you've been drinking. Do you think you and your teammates would let your coach see that in the future if there was some sort of return for that?
I think it depends.
Okay. Jacob, you want to take this in another direction? Yeah, no, look, I mean, the ownership of the data, and we in Nerdville, right, where all the dorks are talking about the technology now, you may have seen there's these things called NFTs. You mentioned SNL. They just did a spoof on this. So it's sort of jumped the shark in terms of popularity and common knowledge. So the idea is, like, as an athlete, Gronkowski's done this. Jacob, how many other folks have done this now?
Yeah, dozens by now.
Dozens of athletes. In fact, you need to do one just to be cool. So you need an NFT, and the NFT could capture any part of what you want to sell. And it's wild. I mean, it's really just crazy. Your imagination can really go anywhere you want it to. You could sell your data as part of some sort of, authentic thing that a fan wants to own for some reason.
Yeah.
Nerdy stuff. All right, Jacob, you want to go somewhere else?
Well, kind of within that vein, one of the things, that's really hot right now is injury prevention, right? Can I prevent the ACL tear rather than try to fix it afterwards? But to me, the biggest barrier there, and I'm curious where you stand on this, is, if you're going into a game in the Olympics and the coach says, oh, you're at an 80% risk factor, I can't play you tonight. Like, what is your reaction in that kind of world?
Am I allowed to swear? No, I'm kidding. I think, and that's where it, you go back and forth, because I'm sure everybody's seen or read Moneyball, right? And, I don't remember what they called it for the movie, but there is sort of that traditional landscape. And I do believe that, there is data that's extremely valuable, but, have we been able to track what willpower? And you get in these situations and you're like, okay, is this player better at, 80% rested versus the 100% rested player? And I think that's where you kind of have to weigh out and sift through these different markers to figure out what's going to give you the best competitive advantage. But for me personally, I'd be like, no, like, I'm suiting out. But I think that's just like the competitor in me. And maybe that's also, maybe that will change, right? And it's like, no, like, this person's going to give us a better look. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to be comfortable with your coach's decision. But I don't know if we're necessarily there yet with just a single data point.
Yeah. And I imagine it's easier for a coach to tell you you're going to sit out of practice today than maybe that's step one.
But as you said, though, it's like, you collect all these different algorithms are going through the NHL games or, whatever sport. And then you're trying to fine tune them, right? Because maybe, the whatever equation you came up with doesn't really give you the full picture of what you're trying to capture. So you're only as strong as what you put into it. So it's just interesting to think about it that way as well, because these things are continuing to develop and advance. Because before it's like, oh, well, this guy's breaking the puck out. And then now we've got another measurement that's like, oh, well, he's turning it over versus actually keeping possession. So is he really breaking the puck out? So it's interesting how we look at these things.
Is there a stat is there a magical stat that you would love to know that maybe we don't know right now, but is theoretically possible?
No, I think just like a fun one for me and something I've talked with, the sport logic people about would be, for goalies, like if they get scored on in the first period versus the third, like what the impact, if there's a way to measure their mental stamina in that way and how that impacts their performance would be interesting just from a shooter standpoint.
All right, you want to break them down early.
Yeah,
I was gonna spin that question to you, be like, what stat could we tell you about the competition that would give you an advantage? Yeah, I could imagine playing with a goalie's brain. That would be good. How many goals have you scored? Do you know?
I have no idea. But I love celebrating,
Jacob, do we know? Do we have that stat readily available to
right?
us? Yeah.
I don't have it.
We got to have it somewhere. You think it's in thousands?
I have no idea.
That's wild that you don't know.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because if we had a league, I'm sure it would be a lot easier to keep track of.
When it would be, people would be selling that data. Yes. In doing research about you, I'm not a hockey guy, so I apologize. But what's a natural hat trick?
Natural hat trick? 3 goals.
But what's an unnatural hat trick?
We could do like the Gordie Howe hat trick where you get a goal, a penalty. And
got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that meant. So
I've always felt, there's some cheap hat tricks that come with the empty netter at the end, right? And
yes.
I see. So that's unnatural.
Got an asterisk, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I don't know. I think, to be honest, the empty nets are the hardest ones.
Really?
Yeah, because you've got the entire net. There's no reason why you should miss.
Fair
it's
enough.
One of those situations. Right?
Yeah.
There's more pressure than there should be.
Do you practice on an empty net from half ice or something?
Yeah, it depends on the coach. We had one coach who was like, do not take a shot until you cross the red line. We've also had coaching staff that's like, get it out of the zone whenever you can ice it, throw it down there. But when we get closer to bigger competitions, people are definitely just kind of trying to throw it down there because it definitely relieves a lot of pressure, especially if the game's tight.
Angela had a very clear arch nemesis who now shares some space with her in Toronto on the Hall of Fame wall. Do you have one? Do you have somebody that's got your number?
No. There's, you can compare faces of the game, I guess, if you want to call us that, right? And so, I guess people would compare Marie-Philippe Poulin, us sort of juxtaposed, right? But she's a center, I'm a winger, so it doesn't even make that much sense. And granted, like Haley, I'm assuming you were saying Haley.
I wouldn't know.
I don't know who it is. She's a forward and she's a D, right? So, but no, I think, it's MPP, as we call her, is sort of a once in a generation type of player. So she's lethal. So you definitely, when she's on the ice, Okay.
So tell us about what is the future for the Secret Dream Gap Tour. I knew I was going to bungle that. Tell everybody what it is, and then tell us what the future is for it. Did it have a time horizon and it ends, or is there some visibility into sort of this dream never ends?
Yeah, well, it doesn't end until we establish a sustainable professional league, that provides a livable wage. I think that's just sort of the baseline. But
so you guys started a players association.
We started an association.
Yep. So walk us through it, because I don't know that everybody's familiar with it.
So we had a semi-pro league that people were playing around in the U.S. and we had a Canadian league fold. At the time, we were going over to World Championships, and the U.S. and Canadians sat down at World Championships. Essentially, we're like, okay, we're going to solve this after the tournament. So fast forward, we solved. The solution we came up with was sort of like if you want to call it, sort of a pop-up shop, so to speak. And what that meant was we were going to fill the gap of not having a professional place to play by providing programming and training resources to the players who were willing to be a part of the PWHPA, which is the Professional Women's.
It doesn't roll off our tongue either, but yes, we get it.
Yeah. So we had no idea what it would look like. We were just like, we need these games, we need programming, let's make it happen. So that's what we did. And lo and behold, shortly through that, Secret signed on as a sponsor and said, we want to sponsor the Dream Gap Tour. So it became the Secret Dream Gap Tour. And now we're in year 2. We had no idea what this year was going to look like. We originally knew what it was going to look like last spring. Global pandemic hit. We're on plan. I don't even know what number. And now we've had a game at Madison Square Garden, had it at the United Center. And now we're heading to St. Louis, which is outstanding.
There's just a lot of people that believe that Paul Rabel and the Premier League lacrosse group and that this touring model is better. It's just better because you don't have the regional fan bases that have to sustain a home audience all the time and you can be in different places. Is this giving you confidence that there is that business model for women's hockey, or do you still like, no, look, we still want our WNBA home court, home base? Where's your head on that?
I love what Paul's doing. I think it's fantastic, and had a couple conversations with him because I'm like, hey, Paul, need a little advice here. But no, I think sort of the traditional part of me likes being in traditional hockey markets, and to utilize these shared sources or shared services, I should say, that existing NHL clubs already have, because there's a vast amount of knowledge that we can just continue to build on and resources that we can kind of streamline that would make starting a new thing less expensive, and we could sort of cut that learning curve. But then also have, exhibition games in non-traditional markets to bring hockey to areas that haven't been introduced to it in the same way.
Yeah, one of the things Paul did really well was give ownership to the athletes that participated. You saw Athletes Unlimited is starting to do that with a number of the different sports they're launching. In addition to athlete ownership, he was mindful of making sure that the athletes had access to the youth academies, the camps, the other ways of making money while the season wasn't in session. How do you spend most of your time in the off season with young aspiring hockey players? Do you run camps? Do you go to clinics? Do you do meet and greets? What is sort of your model for engaging the up and coming fans?
Yeah, I usually run camps, or I hop in on other players' camps. A couple of my teammates and I ended up going to Australia 2 years ago, I think, just because it was an amazing opportunity to showcase hockey, and then two, it's just fun to travel, right, and to be with the girls, and it's great. But I think camps are game changing. I remember when I was growing up in Chicago, I was able to go, and actually Kendall Coyne and Savannah Harmon, two of my other teammates here, we attended Cami Granato's camp, and they had just won a gold medal, and it was just exciting. And I remember how awesome that was as a camper and how that changed my life. And I was like, okay, if I can provide something similar to that experience to the next generations that are coming up, what an awesome way to do it. And yeah, in the back end, I can support other people who are able to come and work, and whether they're in college or other teammates can get paid as well.
Awesome. Jacob, we're getting close to the time when we're going to let Hilary probably get some rest or do whatever else she needs to do today. Do you have any other questions that you want to make sure we touch on before we wrap?
Well, I was curious, you've talked about the effort with the PWHPA, and I know in New York, Billie Jean King was there and spoke to you guys and was part of the effort. And I'm curious just how much research you've done on the history of women's sports, how you guys see yourselves fitting into that, if you take lessons from what's worked in the past, and just kind of how you see yourself as part of that, that long arc that we're now, making progress towards.
Yeah, I mean, we're standing on the shoulders before us. So and by no means would any of us say, we're starting this thing, right? Because we're simply a small piece that's pushing it forward. Maybe we're going to have the greatest hand in building an actual league. But, Billie Jean King always reminds us to kind of stick with it and be patient, because things don't happen overnight. And having her support, and obviously she's done it, is just, it's huge for all of us. And I think at the end of the day, we're so close to it. So she provides a little bit of objectivity, that we're like, we need this thing yesterday. But, she's like, it takes time. These things take time. And unfortunately, you guys are the ones that are actually doing it right now. But it's going to get where it needs to be. We just have to have confidence in our group, which we have an amazing collection of, amazing is the only way I can put it, athletes, a part of the PWHPA, and phenomenal partnerships to help us see the finish line.
Well, one of the things I want to make sure we do is give you the last word here. But before I let you do that, I just want to say I have two sons. They got introduced to hockey through Angela and have been watching you and your teammates, and it's amazing. I also have a young niece who plays hockey, and what you're doing just to kind of give her that goal is very personal to me, because I really can see how every one of you is changing her view of what's possible in the future. And she's going to get cut from teams. She's going to have struggles and she's going to go along the way. But now she has somebody really present to look up to. And I want to just thank you for her. Kendra is definitely one of those people who's like following every move you guys are making. So I really do appreciate it from that perspective. And Angela said to say hello. She said she looks forward to welcoming you into the Hall of Fame when you are ready to put those skates up. So no pressure anywhere on that. So before we wrap, do you have anything that Jacob and I didn't ask you that you want to touch on?
No, I think we covered it. I'm excited for sports. It's what an incredible time. It's just it's all coming together. So
it is all coming together. COVID, hopefully everybody's getting vaccinated. We're going to return to sport.
There's fans there for you guys in the winter. That's what we're hoping for.
We are. Yep. Stay safe, and thanks for joining us today, Hill.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Be well.